Every move was planned, every reaction calculated. Even her breakdown was part of the script. While her enemies celebrate their victory, they have no idea they are walking straight into a trap years in the making. With hidden evidence, secret allies, and perfect timing, Jordan is about to turn the courtroom into the ultimate stage and deliver a checkmate no one saw coming.
My family told everyone I was insane. My sister created the lie and my mother sold it with tears. A doctor's signature made it seem real. Now they are here in court claiming I am too unstable for $3.2 million. They do not know about the sealed red file on the judge's desk. This day took 7 years to come. What is about to happen will ruin them. If you want to hear how, comment with where you are listening from. I am happy you are with me. Be warned, this story contains drama for entertainment. Any resemblance to real people is a coincidence. The lessons, however, are very real. This is the story of Jordan. It is 9 in the morning on a cool Wednesday. I am in courtroom 7B in Boston. The buzzing fluorescent lights make the wood paneled room feel cold. My sister Natalie sits across from me, smoothing her blazer and smiling at the judge. She seems perfectly relaxed, as if she has already won. I am at my table by myself. I have no lawyer, no stack of papers, just a yellow notepad and a pen. Natalie hired Mr. Montgomery, a skilled lawyer who acts like he has never lost a case. My mother, Barbara, is right behind them. Her hands are tightly clasped, her eyes puffy and red. In a gray suit, she plays the part of a worried mother. The courtroom is not full, but enough people are watching to make me feel exposed. A few reporters are in the back. My Aunt Susan, my father's sister, sits in the third row, her face unreadable. I see a man near the exit and look away. It is Agent Foster, my FBI contact in civilian clothes. Judge Edward Chambers sits above us. He is 61 with silver hair and a face that reveals nothing. He has seen many family disputes in this very room. He looks at his notes, then at me, and then at Natalie. His gavel hits the block one time. This court is now in session. The case is number 2025-CV-4472. The hearing is about the conservatorship petition for Jordan Ann Keller. Miss Natalie Keller is the petitioner. Miss Jordan Keller is the respondent. Are both sides here? Yes, Your Honor, Mr. Montgomery says, standing up. Yes, Your Honor, I say. My voice is quiet but steady. Judge Chambers nods slightly. For everyone here, this is a hearing about guardianship. It is not a criminal case. The petitioner wants legal control over the respondent due to claims of mental incompetence. Mr. Montgomery, you can give your opening statement. Montgomery stands, fixing his tie. He walks to the center of the room like he owns the place. He clears his throat and speaks to the judge. Your Honor, this case is about love. It is about a family taking care of one of their own. It is about saving someone who cannot save herself. He pauses for a moment. Jordan Keller is 29 years old. She does not have a steady job or a reliable income. For years, she has lived alone, lost in paranoid ideas that have gotten worse. I can feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. I do not move a muscle. I keep my expression neutral. I just sit with my hands folded and let him talk. Dr. Anthony Reed, a psychiatrist with 25 years of experience, diagnosed Miss Jordan Keller with paranoid delusions. She falsely claims that she works for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She believes her own family is plotting against her. She is unable to recognize her own sickness. She refuses any kind of treatment, Your Honor. She is a danger to herself and her own future. Montgomery clicks a remote. A grainy black and white video plays on a screen. The date stamp reads Saturday, March 1st at 10:47 in the morning. The video is of me in a bank yelling and waving my arms. A bank worker steps back. A security guard walks toward me. The image freezes. This was filmed at Commonwealth Bank and Trust just 4 days ago. A court order froze Miss Keller's bank account for her own safety. When she found out, she became very upset and confrontational. Bank security had to remove her from the building. He pauses, letting everyone stare at the frozen picture. He glances at Natalie, who bows her head, pretending to be a heartbroken sister. Natalie Keller is the CEO of a successful company, Keller Properties. She loves her sister very much. She has tried for years to get her professional help, but Jordan always says no. She will not admit she has a problem. Now, a life insurance payout of $3.2 million is coming in 45 days on Jordan's 30th birthday. There is a great risk that she will waste all of this money. Montgomery's voice turns soft. Your Honor, Miss Natalie Keller is asking for one thing. She wants the authority to protect her sister and get her the medical care she needs. She wants to manage the money until her sister gets better. This is not about control, it is about love. He sits down. The courtroom is quiet. Natalie dabs her eyes. Barbara makes a small sobbing sound. The reporters write in their notebooks. Mr. Montgomery is an expert at his job. He has told a story that sounds tragic and believable to anyone who does not know the truth. But I know the truth, and so does the judge. I look at Judge Chambers. He is listening and writing. His face is still impossible to read. And then I see it. A thick red folder sits on his bench. It is closed and marked with the words, sealed. Federal file, United States Attorney's Office. He has not opened it yet, but I know exactly what is inside. It contains my FBI credentials, the report on Natalie's money laundering, and the proof that links her to organized crime. That is why this hearing is just a show. Natalie does not know what is in that folder. Montgomery does not know either, but I do. The second Judge Chambers opens it, their entire lie will fall apart. I look at Susan in the third row. Her face shows no emotion, but we make eye contact for a second. Agent Foster by the door stands perfectly still. He is waiting. We are all waiting. Judge Chambers clears his throat. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. He turns to me. Miss Keller, you are representing yourself. Do you want to make an opening statement? Not at this time, Your Honor. A quiet murmur goes through the room. Natalie stares at me with a confused look. Mr. Montgomery leans in and whispers to her. She nods, but she looks unsure. Good. Let them worry. The judge taps a different folder with his pen. He speaks to Montgomery. Before we hear from any witnesses, there is an issue I must address. The room becomes silent. He picks up the red folder and looks right at Natalie. Miss Keller, do you know about a federal file related to this case? The calm look on Natalie's face finally breaks. I do not, Your Honor. I did not know the federal government was involved. Montgomery leaps to his feet. Your Honor, I have to object. I was not told about this either. This is a guardianship case, not a federal case. Judge Chambers nods his head slowly. I understand, but I got this sealed file from the United States Attorney's Office. I cannot say what is in it right now, but you both should know it exists. It might become important as we move forward. Natalie holds her tissue tightly. Barbara sits up a little straighter. Mr. Montgomery's confidence has visibly evaporated. The judge places the folder back in the center of his bench. We will now proceed with the witnesses as planned. Mr. Montgomery, you may call your first witness. Mr. Montgomery hesitates, glances at Natalie, and then collects himself. Thank you, Your Honor. I lean back, starting to enjoy this. Natalie came here today believing this fight was already over. My sister really thought she had this won, armed with her video, a doctor's note, and our mother's fake tears. She was convinced everything was going according to her plan, but she was deeply mistaken. The true battle had not even started. It all began 6 days earlier at the dinner for my mother's 60th birthday. That Friday evening in late February, I entered the harbor room at Rose Wharf. I knew instantly it was going to be a terrible night. The restaurant was right on the Boston harbor. Massive windows looked out onto the dark water and the glittering skyline. It was an extremely fancy and sought-after place. You had to reserve a table months in advance. The servers moved with a silent, practiced grace. The champagne flutes alone cost more than my monthly rent. The occasion was my mother's 60th birthday. 30 guests were in a private room filled with white roses and silver candles. I made sure to arrive 15 minutes late. It was just enough to miss the awkward greetings and slip in unnoticed. I wore a plain, cheap black dress, which was entirely intentional, but I saw my mistake the moment I arrived. Natalie intercepted me immediately. She was in a red Gucci dress that must have cost a fortune. Her hair was styled perfectly, and her diamond jewelry glittered. She belonged there. I clearly did not. You are late, she hissed in a low, sharp tone. And what are you wearing? This is an important night, Jordan. It is only a dress. It looks like a black garbage bag, she shot back. She scanned the room and then leaned in closer. Mom's friends are all here. They are going to ask what you do. What am I supposed to say? You could always try telling them the truth. I work for myself as a data consultant, I explained. Natalie laughed, a small and ugly sound. And what did you make last year, 10 or 15,000? She sneered. My business is worth $50 million, by the way. I said nothing and simply walked by her. A massive crystal chandelier sparkled over the long dining table. My mother sat at the head of the table, her cheeks pink from champagne. She looked beautiful in a silk dress that matched her happy expression. Jordan, darling, please come sit by me. But Natalie moved faster. She slid into the chair next to our mother, placing a hand on her arm. Mom, Jordan can sit down there. These seats are reserved for the Hendersons. My name was on a card at the very end of the table, close to the kitchen doors. Every seat around me was empty. I felt like an outsider at my mother's own birthday celebration. Nobody approached me to chat. The attendees were my mother's wealthy friends and Natalie's business associates. The air was thick with talk of finance, designer clothing, and loud chatter. My Aunt Susan was absent. Natalie had made sure she was not invited. Dinner began with lobster bisque, followed by filet mignon with artfully placed vegetables. I ate without a word, the conversation swirling around me like I was not even there. That was perfectly fine with me. Going unnoticed is a valuable skill in my profession. At 8 o'clock, Natalie rose and tapped her wine glass. I would like to propose a toast, she said in a polished tone, to the most incredible mother a person could wish for. You built this family from nothing. You were always there for us. The entire room applauded. My mother gently wiped a tear from her eye. I am so proud to carry on that legacy, Natalie continued. Keller Properties is thriving. We are expanding and creating new opportunities for people. And, Mom, this is all thanks to you. The guests applauded again, then her gaze settled directly on me. And of course, we can't forget my little sister Jordan. She paused for a beat too long. She is still finding her way in the world, still working things out, but we all love her, don't we? A handful of people gave a polite laugh and glanced at me. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks from the humiliation. My mother chimed in. Jordan was always so sensitive, not like Natalie. Natalie has always been a true fighter. A woman in a pearl necklace leaned toward me. And what is it you do, dear? I'm a data consultant. Oh, and for which company? She pressed. I work for myself. I see. Her smile grew stiff. Natalie smoothly interrupted. Jordan is just taking some personal time. There is no reason for her to hurry. She has no family of her own to care for, she added. I placed my fork on my plate. Please excuse me, I need to find the restroom. I got up, grabbed my purse, and walked away from the table. But I did one crucial thing before I stood up. I had launched a recording app on my phone. The application was designed to look like a simple weather app. I tapped the record icon. I put the phone inside my handbag and left it on my seat. I stayed in the restroom for about 10 minutes. This gave the guests enough time to move to the balcony with their cigars and cocktails. When I returned, the dining area was nearly vacant, but I could hear voices near the windows. I stopped in the doorway. It was Natalie speaking in a low, tense whisper. Mom, we have a serious problem. The Harbor Towers project is short $22 million. The auditors are asking some difficult questions. My mother's voice was slightly slurred. What? How could that happen? That is not important right now, Natalie snapped back, her voice sharp. I need to get into the trust fund. Dad's life insurance is $3.2 million. When does Jordan receive her share? She turns 30 in 45 days. That money is hers. Natalie let out a bitter laugh. If this project goes under, we lose it all. The house, the company, our whole life. You have $350,000 of credit card debt. How will you pay that? A brief silence followed. Jordan does not need that money, Natalie said. She can hardly take care of herself. She has no career, no relationships. If she had an accident, if she was declared unable to manage her affairs, you or I could be her legal guardian. My mother hesitated. Natalie, that seems a bit much. Her tone was filled with concern only for herself. Each word she said felt like a physical blow. Inside my bag, my phone was recording their whole confession, capturing their entire awful plan. After a moment, I walked back into the room. They immediately fell silent. I picked up my purse from the chair and headed for the door. Natalie looked over at me. Are you leaving so soon? I told her. I have to work in the morning. She gave me a tiny, satisfied smile. Oh, right, your job. Outside, the chilly February air sliced right through my dress. I got to the parking garage, slid into a rental car I hired under a fake name, and just sat. I stopped the recording and listened to it. The sound was perfectly clear. A $22 million problem, a scheme to steal my inheritance, a plot to make everyone think I was insane. I encrypted the file and sent it to a secure Federal Bureau of Investigation server. Then I stared at the dashboard and let the truth sink in. I felt ashamed, alone, and horrified that my own sister wanted to ruin my life. I had a feeling Natalie was in some kind of trouble. I never guessed that destroying me was her solution. The next day, everything was going to be different. At 7 o'clock on Saturday morning, a loud pounding on my front door woke me. It was so hard it sounded like someone was trying to break in. I stayed in bed for a second, looking at the ceiling while my heart raced. The banging came again. 3 sharp, heavy knocks echoed through my little townhouse. I threw back the covers, found a sweatshirt, and pulled it on over my sleepwear. The cold wood floor touched my bare feet as I went downstairs. I looked through the peephole and saw a man on my porch. He seemed to be in his mid-40s with hair that was thinning, and he wore a cheap suit while holding a clipboard. He appeared both exhausted and irritated. He knocked again. I opened the door just a little. "Are you Jordan Keller?" "Yes." "You have been served." He shoved a large envelope into my hand, then turned and left without saying anything else. I saw him get into an old, beat up car and drive off quickly. I shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it, feeling the strange weight of the papers. I walked to the kitchen, set the envelope on my small wooden table, and took a seat. The morning light felt gray and cold. The house was completely quiet. It was just me, the silent house, and that envelope. I tore it open. Two official papers sat on the table. They were covered in seals and logos, with my name printed right at the top. The first was a temporary restraining order. My heart started to beat faster as I read the text. Natalie Keller had asked the court to freeze every one of Jordan Keller's bank accounts and properties. The paper also said I was not allowed to contact her or my mother, Barbara Keller. If I broke the order, I would be arrested on the spot. It was signed last night, Friday at 6 o'clock, long before our dinner. My bank accounts had been frozen at 6 o'clock that morning. I set that document down and looked at the second one. It was called Section 12, a request for an emergency mental check. The person who filed it was a Dr. Anthony Reed. The patient was me, Jordan Ann Keller, age 29. The report said I was suffering from extreme paranoid thoughts. It claimed that I believed I was an agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It stated I made untrue claims about my family doing illegal things. It also pointed out I did not have a steady job. The doctor decided I was a serious threat to my own safety. He recommended a 72-hour stay for observation at the Brookline Psychiatric Institute. This was filed on Friday at 8 in the morning, hours before I recorded my sister's scheme. Natalie had planned all of this. She had been working on this for weeks. I put the documents down and placed my hands on the cool wood of the table. My breathing was quick and shallow. I made myself calm down and think. This was not a moment to panic. It was a moment to create a plan. I reached for a cabinet above the refrigerator. I took out a small lockbox and opened it. Inside, I found $340 in cash. It was a pile of $20 and $10 bills held together with a rubber band. Since my bank account was frozen, this was all the money I had. I did have access to a Federal Bureau of Investigation emergency fund of $2,400. It was kept in a credit union account under a fake name. That was my escape money, totally separate from Jordan Keller. But using that card would leave a digital trail. If Natalie's lawyers checked my spending, they would see it. They would want to know where that money came from. My entire secret identity would be revealed. I could not take that chance. I locked the box and pulled open a drawer under the microwave. I took out two prepaid mobile phones. The Federal Bureau of Investigation provided them, and they were registered to false names. I turned one on, and it showed a full battery. My secure laptop was upstairs in my bedroom, hidden inside a hollowed-out book. All the proof against Natalie was saved on it. The laptop held bank records, fake business papers, emails, and the audio file from the dinner. Then I thought about a car which I did not own. That was a Federal Bureau of Investigation rule for its secret agents. If you do not have a registered vehicle, you do not leave a paper trail. The agency normally took care of my transportation. For my own travel, I used trains or ride-hailing apps, but now I was stuck, just like my sister wanted. I sat back on the couch and stared at the two legal papers. Natalie had left me with no cash and no transportation. If I stayed here, she would send the police to take me for a 72-hour mental check. By the time I was out, she would have already seized my inheritance. I needed to act, but my move had to be smart. I picked up the untraceable phone and made a call. After two rings, a calm voice said my name, Jordan. It was Agent Marcus Foster, my partner for the last 7 years. He was the one person I could trust completely, but even he could not get me out of this situation. Natalie had submitted the restraining order and the Section 12 petition yesterday. I could almost picture him piecing together the events. He already knew what was going on. The agency had seen this coming but was not able to warn me. A warning would have let my sister know something was wrong. I asked if he could step in, but he said no. If the agency became involved, our whole case would be ruined. Natalie's attorneys would say it was a setup. A judge might dismiss all of our evidence. We would lose our only chance to catch her. I shut my eyes. My next task was perfectly clear. I had to perform my part without making any errors. I had to go into that bank and pretend to lose my composure completely. Natalie needed to believe her trap was closing perfectly, just as she planned it. She has to believe you are panicked and falling apart, he told me. She needs the world to think you are having a total breakdown. He insisted that they could not let me be taken to the hospital, no matter what happened. If I went into that facility, our entire investigation would fall apart. He said a co-worker named Susan was waiting nearby to help if things got too dangerous. But until then, I was totally by myself. I told him I understood the mission. His voice became a little softer. He told me to be very careful. Natalie was moving much quicker than they had predicted. She was not just desperate, she was trapped, and that made her incredibly dangerous. I knew he was correct. I ended the call and looked at the gray sky outside. I had no money, no car, and no one to help me. All I had was $340 in cash and a very dangerous plan. I had to walk right into a trap and act like I was completely surprised by it. I had two choices. I could either stay here and let the police come for me, or I could visit the bank and play the role that Natalie had written for me. If I stayed hidden, she would win easily, which meant the bank was my only real option. I looked down at the legal papers on my coffee table. It was only 7:45 in the morning. The bank did not open until 9:30. That left me a little time to get ready. I went into my bedroom to change my clothes. I chose an old pair of jeans, a faded sweater, and some sneakers. I pulled my hair back into a messy ponytail and did not put on any makeup. I needed to look like someone who was truly coming undone. I went to the kitchen and ate a granola bar, but I could not taste a thing. I counted my money again, all $340. I put the bills in my wallet and pushed it deep into my pocket. After that, I just sat in the quiet of my apartment. I could hear a car pass by now and then and the low sound of the city waking up. The only thing I could hear inside was the sound of my own breathing. At 8:30, I looked up the train schedule online. The red line came every 12 minutes on the weekend. If I left my place at 9, I would get downtown by about 9:40. The timing was perfect. I would enter the bank just 10 minutes after it began its business for the day. At exactly 9 o'clock, I got up and put on my coat. The cold February wind hit my face as I went out the door. I pulled the zipper on my jacket up to my chin and started the 10-block walk to the station. My breath made small white puffs in the freezing air. The neighborhood streets were calm, dotted with a few runners and someone walking a dog. I was just another face in the crowd. I went down the stairs into the subway station, bought my ticket, and waited on the platform. The train pulled in 3 minutes later, and it was already packed with people. I found a small space to stand near the doors, gripping a metal pole as we rushed into the black tunnel. The train ride lasted for 30 minutes. I stood the entire time, hardly noticing the stations as they blurred past. I got off at the downtown crossing stop and took the stairs up to the bustling city streets. I walked for 5 blocks with giant skyscrapers looming over me. People in business suits rushed by with their morning coffee, not even seeing me. I entered the Commonwealth Bank at around 10:30. The inside was made of polished stone and shining glass, and the bright lights reflected on the floor. I saw 4 tellers helping customers at a counter and loan officers at desks on the other side. In the very back corner, a glass office had a nameplate that read Robert Turner, branch manager. I instantly spotted the security cameras mounted in every corner of the ceiling. I went up to the first available teller, a young woman in a blue blazer whose name tag said Amanda. She gave me a polite smile, but it vanished as she took a closer look at me. She asked how she could help, and I told her my account was frozen and I needed to know why. As she typed on her computer, her professional expression changed to one of concern. She told me there was an order from the court and that I had to speak with Mr. Turner. She gestured toward the glass office and suggested I knock on his door. I knocked on the glass office door. A man in his 50s with cold, blank eyes looked up, but he did not seem surprised. It was clear he was expecting me. He got up, opened the door for me, and told me he had been waiting. I sat in the chair he pointed to, and he went back to his own seat. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other without speaking. I asked him why my money was frozen. He explained that a court order arrived that morning and he could not discuss it any further. I argued that I should be able to get my own money. He answered that the court order had changed everything. His voice was flat and completely uncaring. He said my problem was now a legal issue. I begged him, saying I just needed a little money to pay my rent. He refused my request immediately. I could feel my voice getting louder as my anger started to rise. This was my money, but he calmly replied that the court saw things differently. I stood up from my chair and said this was illegal because no one had told me. He explained that this was how emergency orders worked, and he seemed to enjoy telling me that. I leaned across his desk. I asked if he could spare just $1 so I could buy some food. He just repeated that I had to deal with the court. I then insisted on talking to his boss. He told me that he was the man in charge. I pressed my hands down on his desk and demanded that he release my money now. His face remained a cold mask. He simply pushed a secret button under his desk. Two very large security guards appeared in the doorway almost instantly. They were big men wearing dark uniforms. Turner stood up from his chair and told me to leave the bank. It was in that moment that I finally saw the cameras. One was high in a corner pointing right at me, and another was over the door. A third camera was outside, aimed into his office. They were recording everything I did from several angles. This whole situation was a setup. Turner was part of the plan, trying to make me have an angry meltdown. Natalie wanted video of me looking completely out of control. It was a perfect trap, and I was standing right in the middle of it. But since I knew it was a performance, I was in complete control of my own part. I took a sharp breath and let my voice tremble with fake rage. I pleaded with him, saying it was not fair and I really needed my money. One of the guards started walking toward me and said it was time to go. I shouted that what they were doing was against the law and I would report them. The guard grabbed my arm with a tight grip. I pulled it back just enough for the cameras to catch it, and then I stopped moving. I told him to take his hands off me, yelling that I had rights. His partner warned me they would drag me out if they had to. I glanced at Turner, who was watching the whole thing with a smug look on his face. I let my shoulders droop as if I was completely defeated. I got up and walked straight out of his office. The two security guards walked me through the bank. We passed the line of tellers, and I saw Amanda staring at me with her mouth wide open. Other customers had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene. The guards followed me all the way to the front doors. I heard the lock click behind me. I stood on the sidewalk trying to get my breath back. The cold air burned my lungs. The city was full of noise and motion all around me. People would look at me for a second, then quickly look away. To them, I was just another person having a terrible day. After walking a few blocks, I rested against a brick wall to think. Natalie now had the video she wanted so much. It was perfect proof of me shouting and fighting with security. It was exactly what she needed for her case against me. But she did not know about one very important detail. In 6 days, we would be in a courtroom facing each other. Her lawyer would show that video as proof that I was not mentally stable. And then I will calmly explain the whole story to the judge. I will describe how my own sister and a crooked bank manager set up the entire event. And Natalie will finally realize she made a huge mistake. I took a long, slow breath on the sidewalk, letting my heart slow down. I took out my phone to get an Uber. The ride home was 12 minutes away and would cost $18. I tapped the button to confirm, but the payment did not go through. Of course, it did not. My bank account was completely useless. My debit card was just a piece of plastic. I checked my wallet and found $340 in cash, but the app would not accept it. I absolutely could not use my emergency FBI credit card. That would create a digital trail for Natalie's team to find. My entire investigation would be ruined. This gave me only one option. I had to walk home. I had a long trip ahead of me from downtown Boston to my apartment in Jamaica Plain. It was a 6 mile journey. The walk would take me at least 3 hours. It was only 11 in the morning. The air was cold and damp. It was the type of chill that gets deep into your bones. A light mist started to fall. I did not have an umbrella. I pulled the hood of my coat over my head and started the long walk. I went past Copley Square, where a stone lion stands guard at the Boston Public Library. I kept walking through Back Bay by gorgeous houses with flower boxes and cars that cost more than I make in a year. Nobody looked at me twice. I was totally invisible. I was just another woman walking in the drizzle. Around noon, I got to Fenway. A dull pain began to spread in my feet. The light mist had become a cold, steady rain. My coat was now soaked all the way through. I went into a small convenience store and used cash to buy a bottle of water. That was $2. I had $338 left. As I walked, I started thinking about my father. Michael Keller passed away 7 years ago when I was just 22. His death was officially called an accident. It was on a Tuesday morning as he was driving to his job. He was going west on Route 2 near the edge of the city. All of a sudden, his brakes stopped working. His car swerved off the road, hit a tree, and he died right away. The police report said it was a mechanical problem. A brake line had rusted. They said it was a frequent issue with older cars. They did not see anything strange about it. But I was the only person who knew the real story. A week before he died, my father had called me into his study. He shut the door, asked me to sit down, and gave me a look I had never seen before. It was not anger and it was not sadness. It was pure fear. Jordan, he started, I have to tell you something very important. If I have some kind of accident, do not believe anything Natalie tells you. She is not who you think she is. I remember I laughed nervously. I was confused and very scared. Dad, what on earth are you saying? It is about the life insurance, he said. I am changing it. The entire policy was meant for Natalie, but now it will all belong to you. You will receive it on your 30th birthday. The amount is $3.2 million. You must not tell a soul, especially not your sister. Why can I not tell her? He held my gaze for what seemed like an eternity. Because she is desperate, Jordan, and desperate people will do terrible things. Just 1 week after that conversation, he was dead. I never thought it was an accident, but I had no proof. I was only 22, just out of college, working a job with no future. What could I do? Accuse my own sister of murder? So I took the only path I could see. I sent an application to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 2 years passed before I received the acceptance letter. I trained for another year at Quantico, then was assigned to Boston's Financial Crimes Unit. I asked for a deep cover mission, the kind where you assume a new life for years, and that is what I have been doing. For the last 7 years, my name has been Jordan Keller. I have acted like an unemployed freelancer, the family failure. And over those same 7 years, I have been secretly gathering evidence against my sister. I followed her money, discovered her shell companies, and recorded every call, every message, and every lie. My father was right about her. Natalie is a very desperate woman. She did something unspeakable. She killed him. Now, after 7 years, she is attempting to do the same to me. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was walking through Mission Hill. My feet ached with every step. My jacket was soaked with rain. I had 2 more miles ahead of me. I had to keep going. At 6:30, the sun began to go down. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a thick, dark gray. The streetlights started to glow, one after another. When I finally turned onto my street in Jamaica Plain, I saw my front door. It was open just a little. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. Every muscle in my body tensed up. I was certain that I had not left it open. I quietly walked up the front steps, pushed the door with my foot, and went inside. My living room was completely destroyed. The sofa cushions were scattered across the floor. All the drawers were pulled out, their contents thrown everywhere. My books had been torn from the shelves. It was clear someone was searching for something. I raced up the stairs to my office. The desk was a complete mess. My papers were all over the place. The laptop was still on the desk, but its strong encryption made it useless to them. My notebooks, however, were gone. I had 3 of them, all black, full of notes about the Harbor Towers companies and Connor Flynn's finances. Details I intentionally kept offline. They held 7 years of my work, recorded in pen. I ran to the bathroom and looked in the sink. I saw only ashes and the charred bits of paper. The smell of smoke lingered in the air. A note from my mother was on my desk. It said, "Jordan, we did this for your own good. You are not well. We love you." I crumpled the note in my hand and threw it against the wall. They destroyed my evidence. They invaded my home, ruined my life, and burned my proof. But they do not know one very important thing. I always make copies. I have every page stored on my encrypted computer. Everything is also saved to the cloud in a hidden account. I scanned and saved each page the same day I wrote it. This is a standard bureau procedure. You always back up your evidence. They are sure they have won. They believe the proof has vanished forever, but they have actually made my next step much easier. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. For the first time in 7 years, a new feeling washed over me. It was not anger or fear, but a profound, soul crushing exhaustion. My evidence was safe, so that was not the issue. My bank accounts were frozen, but I had emergency funds. The most difficult part was facing the horrible truth. My own family would ruin me for money. My mother left a note saying she loved me. Then she helped my sister destroy my home and burn my research. I shut my eyes and leaned my head back. I knew they would arrive at dawn. They would try to put me in the Brookline Psychiatric Institute for a 72-hour hold. Once I was there, they would file for control of my finances. Then they would collect the insurance money and vanish. But I will not allow that to happen. My Aunt Susan is on her way. She is my father's sister, the only relative who was ever honest with me, and she is not coming by herself. Sunday at 6 in the morning. A quiet knock on the door woke me from a restless sleep. I was on the sofa feeling completely defeated. I must have fallen asleep around midnight, too exhausted to take off my wet clothes. Every single muscle was sore and my feet were throbbing. The house felt incredibly cold. The knock came again, 3 soft taps. I stood up, went to the window, and peered outside. A woman wearing a denim jacket stood on my porch holding 2 bags of groceries. She was 58 years old with brown hair showing streaks of gray pulled into a simple ponytail. Her eyes were keen and missed nothing. Susan Blake, my father's sister, my aunt. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. "I brought some breakfast," she said, her voice steady and calm. "Are you going to let me in?" I could only nod as I stepped back. She entered, her eyes quickly taking in the destroyed living room without saying a word. She went right to the kitchen and placed her bags on the counter. Then she began to take out the groceries. She had brought bread, eggs, butter, coffee, and a carton of orange juice. Sit down, she said, nodding toward the small table. I did what she said. She filled a kettle with water, put it on the stove, and then located a frying pan. I know about the court order, she stated while cracking eggs into a bowl, and I know they plan to have you committed. How could you know about that? A faint smile appeared on her lips as she glanced over at me. I still have contacts at the bureau. I simply stared at her, completely bewildered. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, she clarified, turning back to the stove. Where did you think I worked for 25 years? In that moment, everything began to click into place. Susan Blake was more than just my aunt. She was a retired agent who had worked in the Boston office's financial crimes unit. She left in 2015, the very year I began my own training. I never had a clue. Your cover story was that you were a school teacher, I said, trying to process this new information. A retired school teacher, she corrected as she whisked the eggs. It was a very effective cover. Your father knew, of course, but no one else did. Not Barbara, and certainly not Natalie. She carefully poured the egg mixture into the hot pan. After your father passed away, I began my own quiet investigation. I thought Natalie was involved, but I lacked proof or authority. I was no longer an agent. I tried to warn Barbara, but Natalie pushed me away. I was suddenly not invited to any family events. She told everyone I was just a bitter and jealous woman. She paused for a second to scramble the eggs. So I continued to watch, and I waited for 7 very long years. She served the scrambled eggs onto 2 plates, added toast, and put one in front of me. I know about Harbor Towers. I know about Connor Flynn, and I am certain that she is the person who murdered your father. I was too stunned to speak, just looking at her. Are you sure? I always believed the brake failure was not an accident, but I could never find any evidence. She sat down at the table across from me with her plate. Then Agent Foster contacted me about a year ago. He let me know you were with the Bureau working undercover. That is when I knew you were finishing what I had started. I raised my fork, but I had lost my appetite. Why was I never told any of this? You needed to see this through yourself. If I had been involved, Natalie would have known. She had to believe her own story about you. Jobless, broken, and completely alone. You acted that part out perfectly. Up until yesterday, I said quietly. Susan gave a slight nod. Exactly. Until yesterday. Now she is rushing her plan forward. She took a bite of her toast, chewing it slowly. Natalie will come for you sometime today, and she is going to have Barbara with her. Dr. Reed is likely coming with them too. The goal is to get you into Brookline Psychiatric. After 72 hours there, she can file for a conservatorship to get the insurance money. That is what I figured. Well, we are not letting that happen. We will not allow her to win, Susan said, placing her fork down to face me. We will let her believe she is in control as we gather our proof. I will be wearing a recording device. I will arrange a meeting with them for tomorrow. I will act concerned about you and make them talk. What if they refuse to say anything? Oh, they will talk. Natalie is extremely arrogant. She is sure she can get away with murder. And Barbara is a weak woman. She will break under even a little bit of pressure. Susan then took a small device from her pocket, a recorder about the size of a flash drive. This is encrypted at a government level. It is admissible in a court of law. I just need one of them to confess to your father's murder or to this guardianship plot. We can make it happen tomorrow. I will phone Natalie tonight. I will say that I am worried about your mental health. She will likely ask to meet for coffee, and I will record everything. I stared at the tiny recorder. It looked so plain. My life for the last 7 years rested on a single conversation. Then Susan's tone turned very serious. You must understand this. In 45 days, you will be 30 years old. That is when the life insurance policy matures. The payout is $3.2 million. If Natalie doesn't have legal control over you by that date, she receives nothing. This means she has to act fast, which will lead to mistakes. I can deal with her. And I know you can as well, but people who are desperate will do desperate things. She moved a little closer. Your father told me that right before he passed away, and he was completely right. I looked into her eyes. Why are you helping me so much? Susan answered without hesitation. Because you are Michael's daughter, and Natalie murdered my brother. I want justice just as much as you do. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the sun was starting to rise. A dog was barking somewhere off in the neighborhood. A car passed the house. Soft morning light came through the kitchen window. Susan got up and took our plates. They will be here any minute. Are you ready for what is coming? I am ready. But my prediction was wrong. Natalie and Barbara came to my house 2 hours later and they brought company. The first knock came at 8:53. I was in the kitchen looking at my burned notebook in the sink. The knock seemed to vibrate through the entire house. Three heavy, determined knocks. It had an official sound. Susan had left an hour before in her old Honda. She promised she would return tonight with a strategy. But we both had a feeling Natalie would not delay. The court papers had been submitted on Friday. Her time was getting short. I went to the front door and pulled it open. Natalie was on the porch in a dark coat, her arms folded. Her face was a mask of fake concern that did not hide her cold eyes. Barbara was beside her, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as if she were already heartbroken. Next to them stood a man I had never seen, but I recognized his name from the legal papers, Dr. Anthony Reed. He was a tall, slender man, perhaps in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and wire rimmed glasses. He wore a dark blue suit and held a leather briefcase, looking every bit the professional. He held out his hand to me. His voice was cold and formal. My name is Dr. Anthony Reed. I am here to perform an emergency psychiatric assessment under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 123, Section 12. I refused to take his hand. I looked past him at the two police officers standing beside their Boston police cruiser. You have no reason to be here, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I am not a threat to myself or to anybody else. Natalie stepped closer. Jordan, just listen to us. We are just trying to give you help. Her words nearly made me laugh. I wanted to scream, but I kept my focus on Dr. Reed. We have never even met, I said. How could you possibly assess a person you have never spoken with? He opened his briefcase and took out a file. I have reviewed the information provided by your family. It describes a pattern of very disturbing behavior. It notes delusional thinking, unstable actions, and a violent outburst at a bank yesterday. The bank. I should have realized. Turner must have called them the moment I was gone. Dr. Reed adjusted his glasses. Based on this file, he said, I have to determine you are a danger to yourself due to mental illness. The law obligates me to demand an immediate evaluation and your hospitalization. He took a pen from his coat and signed the document with a fast, smooth stroke. Just like that, my liberty was gone, all for $25,000. Susan had said that was what Natalie paid for his signature. The way the doctor avoided my eyes and the speed of his pen proved it. You cannot do this legally, I insisted, my voice unwavering. Barbara began to cry more loudly. Oh, Jordan, my sweet girl, she cried. Please do not make this any harder. An officer moved toward me. Ma'am, he said softly, I am going to need you to come with us. I looked over at Natalie. A small smirk was on her face, almost hidden, but I caught it. This was her moment of triumph. She believed she had already won. I took a slow, deep breath to calm down. I needed to handle this perfectly. Any resistance would just prove their story was true. Susan's words played in my head. Do not let them see your strategy. Let them believe they hold all the cards. Fine, I said with a clear voice. I will come with you. Natalie's eyes showed a flicker of shock. She clearly anticipated a big fight. You will? Barbara said, her tone filled with false relief. I went to grab my jacket, using that second to gather my thoughts. The burner phone Susan gave me was safe in my pocket. By the time I turned around, Dr. Reed was already on his way to his car. The female officer asked me to step outside with her. She obviously did not want any trouble. I walked down the front steps of my own house with Natalie and Barbara right behind me. On the street, I turned for one final glance at my home. The front door was still a little bit open. A policeman was holding the back door of the squad car for me. At least I was not in handcuffs. I got into the back seat and the door shut with a heavy sound. The locks clicked into place. Natalie came up to the window and tapped on the glass. I just stared forward, refusing to let her see any reaction. The car's engine came to life. Dr. Reed settled into the front passenger seat. The driver was a man in his 40s who had a thick Boston accent. Dr. Reed stated our destination, Brookline Psychiatric Institute. Then he remarked, It is just a 20-minute trip. We pulled away from my neighborhood and drove through Jamaica Plain. I saw the familiar brick houses and neighborhood stores go by. The trees had no leaves. A cold March sky hung over the city, making everything look gray. In the car, Dr. Reed turned to me. This is the right choice, he told me. It is for your own protection. I kept quiet. I was only thinking about the money. I thought about the message Susan was about to read. I imagined her with the hidden recorder when she met Natalie. We drove west down Huntington Avenue toward Brookline. Traffic was sparse for a Sunday. We went past the Museum of Fine Arts, elegant brownstones, and the Simmons University campus. At 9:42, we turned onto a smaller street. We stopped in front of a tall brick building surrounded by a black iron fence. The gate had a sign, Brookline Psychiatric Institute Emergency Services. I heard the car doors click open. Dr. Reed got out and came around to open my door. Please come with me, he said. I followed him through the gate and up a concrete walkway to the entrance. The place looked old and sad. It had small windows and huge, heavy doors. The lobby had a strong smell of cleaning bleach and old coffee. A guard was posted at a desk. A nurse dressed in blue was waiting by a set of locked doors. Dr. Reed gave her my file. After a quick look, she nodded and faced me. Miss Keller, my name is Nurse Patel. I will handle your admission. Please come this way. A loud buzzer went off as the doors unlocked. They revealed a long, drab beige hallway. The lights were bright and my shoes squeaked with every step. We passed a common room where a television was playing softly. We walked by a nurse's station and a series of closed doors. Nurse Patel showed me into a little office. She gestured for me to take a seat. I will need to take your personal items now, she explained. Your phone, your wallet, your keys, and any jewelry. I took the other phone out of my pocket and set it on the desk. My wallet and keys went next. She sealed everything in a clear plastic bag. We will keep these for you until you are discharged, she said. I had to ask, when will I get out? Your 72-hour hold starts right now. Dr. Reed will be evaluating you for the next 3 days. So that was it. I was stuck for 3 days. It was plenty of time for Natalie to start ruining me. Could I please make one phone call first? I asked her. I am sorry, not until the intake is finished, Nurse Patel said firmly. It is against our rules. She then took me to another hallway and unlocked a small room. The room had a bed, a chair, and a small window covered in wire mesh. I noticed the lock was on the outside of the door. Someone will come to talk with you soon, she told me. Then she was gone and the door closed behind her. I heard the distinct click of the lock. I went over and sat on the hard bed. The mattress was like a board. The blanket felt rough against my skin. The window looked out onto a tiny walled-in courtyard, but I did not feel any fear. Natalie thought she had won. She was certain I was powerless. Now she could take my money and get the insurance payout in just 43 days. What she did not know was Susan. She had no clue about the recorder, and she certainly did not know I would be free in only 12 hours. I leaned back on the stiff mattress and stared at the ceiling. I could handle 12 hours. Susan was already in the city, putting our plan to work. Once I was out, Natalie was going to find out what a huge mistake she had made. The light in the room started to fade. I just lay there, watching the ceiling and waiting. 8 o'clock passed, then 9, then 10. A faint light and a low hum came from beneath my door. Somewhere down the hall, a woman was crying. A man was yelling at nothing. I knew Susan had a plan, but this was more than I expected. At 10 o'clock, the building plunged into darkness. The power was gone. The buzzing light in the hall died, and for a second there was total silence. Then a loud fire alarm screamed through the building. Red emergency lights began to flash in the hallway. I jumped up from the bed. I heard people running and shouting in the corridor. It sounded like staff, patients, and security all at once. Someone was giving orders, but I could not hear them over the alarm. Suddenly, my door flew open. A nurse, looking frazzled and out of breath, stood in the doorway. Miss Keller, there is an emergency. You need to come to the medical wing right away. I opened my mouth to ask a question, but she stopped me. Please, just follow me now. I did not argue. I got out of bed quickly and followed her into the chaos. Other patients were wandering out of their rooms, looking lost in the flashing lights. The staff was trying to control the situation. Guards rushed by, their radios making scratchy noises. The nurse took my arm. She pulled me away from the crowd and down to the end of the hall. Around the corner, I saw an emergency exit door that was wide open. That door should have been locked. The nurse looked straight at me and said a single word. Go. I just looked at her, totally confused. What do you mean? You want me to run? She repeated herself. You have about 30 seconds until they notice you are missing. I did not need to hear anything else. I ran. The stairwell was cold concrete, lit only by flashing red lights. I raced down the steps, my bare feet hitting the hard surface. My heart was pounding in my chest. At the bottom, I pushed my whole body against the heavy exit door. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I was standing in the ambulance area behind the hospital. Right away, I saw Susan's sport utility vehicle with the engine on. Susan reached across and threw the passenger door open. Hurry! Get in! She ordered. I jumped inside and she floored the gas pedal before my door was even shut. We sped out of the lot, tires squealing, and turned onto a dark street. I was trying to catch my breath when I asked her, "How did you do all that?" Susan watched the road as she told me the plan. Agent Foster reported a fake emergency. He said a patient was having a severe allergic reaction in the secure area. It was the ideal distraction. I set off the fire alarm and unlocked the doors from my computer. The Federal Bureau of Investigation knows people in the maintenance department. It was a lot to take in. So you hacked into their system? Susan just shook her head. I did not need to. One phone call was all it took. We got onto Beacon Street and disappeared into the flow of cars. Susan drove like a model citizen, following all the rules so we would not get noticed. I finally asked, "Where are we headed?" Her answer was simple: "Someplace safe." We drove north on Route 1. We went past shopping centers, gas stations, and diners glowing with neon. Boston's lights got smaller and smaller behind us. About 20 minutes later, Susan turned into a little motel named the Riverside Inn. The place looked old and neglected. It seemed like it was still stuck in the 1980s. The paint was chipping away and the parking lot was cracked. I noticed there were no security cameras anywhere. Susan stopped the car and got out. "Wait here," she said. I saw her go to the office and talk to the person at the desk. She used $60 in cash to rent a room. He gave her a key for room 12. Susan returned to the car. She drove us around the side of the building. Our room was up on the second floor. We went up the metal stairs and Susan opened the door. The room was very small. The air smelled like stale cigarettes and dampness. There was a double bed with a worn-out mattress against the wall. A very old television sat on a dresser. I heard the constant dripping from the bathroom tap. Even so, the room was warm, and for the first time, I felt safe. Susan bolted the door and closed the curtains. "You have to hide here for the next 3 days," she told me. "Do not go outside for any reason, and stay off your phone. Natalie is probably trying to find you through it." I told her, "The hospital took my phone, but I have the other one you gave me." All she said was, "Good. Use this one only if you have to call me for an emergency," Susan instructed, giving me a new phone. She put a canvas bag on the bed. It held fresh clothes, some soap, a few protein bars, and some water bottles. "I will get you food and anything else you need. For now, go over all your notes on Natalie. We need to be perfectly prepared for the hearing on Wednesday." I needed to understand her plan. "So, what is the next step? What is your plan?" Susan looked directly at me. "Tomorrow, I have a meeting with Natalie and Barbara. I will have a hidden microphone. I am going to get them to admit to everything." A huge burden was lifted off me, and I collapsed onto the bed. For the first time in 3 awful days, I felt like I could really breathe. My hands were shaking, my feet were dirty and cold, but I was out of harm's way. I told her, "Susan, a recording like this changes everything. There is no turning back. It will put both Natalie and Barbara in jail. The family I thought I had will be gone." Susan nodded slowly. "I know. Are you absolutely prepared for that?" She looked at me closely. Her face was grim, but her eyes held a profound sadness, almost like pity. "Jordan," she said quietly, "they stopped being your family when they took your father's life." A sharp pain shot through my chest. My dad, Michael Keller, he showed me how to ride a bike and tie my shoes. He always urged me to do the right thing. 7 years ago, his car brakes failed on a rainy February night because someone had cut them. "All right," I said, my voice firm. "Let us see this through." Susan took a small black object from her coat. It was the size of a flash drive. "This is a special encrypted recorder from my agency. If I can make them talk, it will capture every word." She placed it on the little table by the bed. "You need to get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a tough day." As she headed for the door, I had to stop her. "Susan," I said, "thank you for doing this." She stopped and glanced back, giving me a small nod. "Your father would have done the same for you." Then she left. I locked the door and went back to the bed. The motel room was deathly quiet. I could only hear a far-off car on Route 1 and the gentle hiss from the old heater. I looked at the disposable phone. I really wanted to call Agent Foster to tell him I was okay, but Susan's warning was clear. Any phone call could be traced, revealing my location, so I shut the phone off and set it beside the recorder. The next day, Susan was going to see Natalie. She would bring the recorder with her. She knew just what to say. By evening, we would finally have the proof we needed to bring my sister down. I leaned back and shut my eyes. Just 3 more days. That was how long I had to wait for the hearing. In 3 days, I would go into that courtroom and reveal all of Natalie's deceptions. I could surely last for 3 more days. My Monday started at 6 in the morning. I used the tiny, grimy shower and drank some instant coffee. By 8 o'clock, I was on the bed with my secure laptop. I kept the curtains drawn, shutting out the morning sun. I used a secret login to get to my protected cloud files. Everything was still there. I had copies of every document, bank records, private messages, court papers, and even the journals Barbara had destroyed. This was the result of months of secret effort. I clicked on the folder named Harbor Towers. The financial papers I discovered were shocking. The city had approved $35 million for new apartments for 120 poor families in South Boston. This project was meant to be Natalie's great success at Keller Development. She made public speeches, had her picture taken with the mayor, and smiled for news cameras with the hopeful families. But somewhere along the line, $22 million of that fund just disappeared. I followed the money's path. It was moved from the Harbor Towers account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Then it went to a second company, and after that, a third. Each payment was carefully made to be just under the amount that would trigger a government report. The money trail ended in an offshore account that could not be traced. There was no name on it, but I was certain I knew who it belonged to. I just had to prove it. I opened the folder with the saved emails. There were thousands of them. It had taken me weeks to read through them all, marking every single one that mentioned Flynn Turner or Harbor Towers. I began to look through the marked emails, searching for a single clue. At 10:30 that morning, I discovered it. The first email was from January 15th, 2025. Natalie had written it to someone with the initials CF. She said the project was running late and that she needed another 60 days to move the money. The response was cold. You get 60 days, no longer. The message finished with a clear warning. If the authorities find out, you are by yourself. CF could only be Connor Flynn. I knew his name from my research. He was known for using Boston real estate to hide illegal money for the mob. He was also my sister's hidden partner. I pulled back from the laptop, just looking at the screen. This was the missing piece I needed. Natalie was not only stealing from a public works project, she was also cleaning money for the Irish mob. I continued to search. At 11 o'clock, I uncovered a second email. This one was from Natalie to R. Turner at Commonwealth Bank, sent on February 28th, 2025. The subject line was a single word, Jordan. The email was brief. Her account is now locked. Do not let her withdraw any money. The email said, record her when she arrives at the bank. I need to show she is mentally unstable. R. Turner quickly replied, it is all set up. The cameras are installed. She is falling right into our trap. My hands clenched into fists as a hot rage surged through me. Turner was not just a bank employee. He was working for Flynn, shielding him from financial investigators. That was how Natalie was always one step ahead of me. It showed how she knew I was getting close to the truth. Turner had betrayed me. I forced myself to take a breath and return to my work. By 2 in the afternoon, I understood their whole scheme. I created a new document and began organizing all the proof. It was time to build the case against them. My sister, Natalie Keller, and her associate, Connor Flynn, were operating a criminal organization. They used the $35 million Harbor Towers money to begin. They moved $22 million through a fake corporation. The trail of money was a complex web going from Harbor Towers to Siebes Holdings, then to Ocean View Capital, and finally ending at Blue Horizon. I had emails between Natalie and Connor where they detailed the plan. They allowed themselves a 60-day time frame. I also discovered her text messages with Richard Turner, where they arranged to lock my bank accounts and make me seem insane. They invented fake companies to cover their activities. CBZ Holdings was established on December 8th, 2024. Ocean View Capital was registered on December 15th. Blue Horizon was created on January 3rd, 2025. They paid Dr. Anthony Reed $25,000 for a false psychiatric report. They used his report to file an urgent court motion against me on March 1st. Natalie also convinced a judge to issue a temporary restraining order on February 28th. I even possessed a recording from my mother Barbara's 60th birthday celebration. In it, she and Natalie discussed taking my inheritance. I saved all this evidence and securely sent the complete file to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Then all I could do was wait. At 5 o'clock, the special phone vibrated. Agent Foster's voice was crisp and businesslike. I got the file, he confirmed. This is very strong evidence, Jordan. We have more than enough to arrest Natalie and Flynn right now. I responded, not quite yet. I need a confession. I need to hear them say what they did to my father. He cautioned me, Jordan, if you wait, you give Natalie a chance to escape. She is not going anywhere, I said with confidence. She is certain that she has already won. She thinks I am in a mental facility, and in 42 days, she will get $3.2 million. She is staying put. Foster paused for a second. What about the plan with Susan? Is she prepared? I answered. She is meeting with them tomorrow. She is going to record their confession, and then this entire nightmare will be done. But what if she fails? He questioned. I glanced at the evidence displayed on my computer. I told him, even without it, we have enough to send them to prison for 20 years. But to get true justice for my dad, I need to hear them admit it, I said, my voice unwavering. I heard Agent Foster let out a sigh on the phone. All right, Jordan, just be cautious. These individuals have taken a life before. They will not hesitate to do it again. I said, I am aware. I ended the call and put the phone on the table. The sun was setting outside. Long shadows stretched across my small motel room. I could hear the steady flow of cars on Route 1 making their way to the city. Tomorrow, Susan would sit down with Natalie and Barbara. She would be wired for sound. She knew exactly which questions to ask. If everything went as planned, we would have their admission of guilt by tomorrow evening. I shut my laptop and lay down on the bed. My whole body felt stiff after sitting for so long. My eyes were sore from looking at the screen. But for the first time in a very long while, I felt a tiny glimmer of hope. I just had to make it through 2 more days. That was it. Just 2 more days until I went to court. Just 2 more days before I could go into that courtroom and show everyone who Natalie really was. I was sure I could last for 2 more days. On Monday evening at 8 o'clock, I switched on the television. My eyes were sore from a long day of going over papers and messages. I definitely needed some rest. I just wished I could hear a different voice for a little while. I changed the channel to Boston 7 News. A newscaster had a very grave look on her face as she began her report. A special bulletin broke into the morning program. The Boston police were on the lookout for Jordan Keller, aged 29. The anchor stated that she had escaped from Brooklyn Psychiatric Institute the night before. They said I was brought in under a Section 12 order for an assessment. The authorities warned that I could be a danger to myself. If you happen to see her, they urged, please contact the Boston police. A terrible picture of me from my driver's license took up the entire screen. It was 3 years old and I appeared drained and furious. I looked at my own face for a second, then I turned the television off. The motel room became very quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet rush of cars on Route 1. I took out my burner phone and called Foster. He picked up immediately. I know, he said, without letting me say a word. I am watching it on the news right now, I told him. They have issued a warrant for my arrest. My voice sounded frail, as if it was not my own. Foster let out a sigh. Natalie is handling this perfectly. She is painting you as the villain, the unstable sister who fled a mental institution, a fugitive. I asked, can you make the warrant go away? No, he replied, his voice unyielding. If the Bureau gets involved now, it will blow your cover. Her lawyers will claim federal interference and a judge could throw out our entire case. We must let this situation unfold. I closed my eyes, feeling drained. So what should I do? You need to stay exactly where you are. Do not leave the house. Do not use your real name for any reason. Susan is coming with provisions. In 2 days, we go to court and we will present all of our evidence. The warrant will be meaningless at that point. But what happens if someone recognizes me before that? Foster was silent for a moment. Then he spoke. If that occurs, then we have already lost. I ended the call. I sat down on the bed and rested my head against the wall, my hands resting in my lap. For the first time in 7 long years, I felt entirely and completely alone. It was a feeling that went beyond just being by myself. I had spent so many hours alone on this case. I had sat by myself in surveillance vans, in run-down apartments, and at family dinners where I had to fake a smile while a recorder was running. But this sensation was different. It was a frigid emptiness that settled deep into my bones. I did not have a family anymore. Natalie and Barbara were trying to have me locked away forever. My father was gone, killed by the 2 women who should have loved him most. My mother had vanished years ago and I had no idea where she went. I had no real friends to speak of. After 7 years of deep undercover work, my entire existence was a performance. There were no genuine connections, no one I could actually count on. Every word I spoke was part of a strategy. Every smile was a calculated move. I did have Susan, and I had Foster. But Susan was putting her own life on the line for me, and Foster was bound by rules that always seemed to work against us. I thought about my dad, Michael Keller. He was the one who taught me to play catch, to change a car tire, and to always get back up when I fell. It was 7 years ago that we buried him, and I always knew his death was not an accident, but I had no proof. For 7 years, Natalie became my entire world. For 7 years, I carefully collected every piece of evidence. For 7 years, I had to pretend to be someone else. I played the role of the younger sister who could not hold down a job, the disappointment, the family screw up. Now, only 2 days before the court date, I was hiding in a cheap motel. I was watching my own face on the news, praying nobody would see me. This was the cost of doing this kind of work. You give up everything, you surrender your name, your family, and your life, all for the sake of the mission. And there were times it felt like the mission was all I had left. At 9 o'clock, I heard three soft knocks at the door. I looked through the peephole. It was Susan. I unlocked the door for her. She carried a paper bag from a nearby diner. Inside was a sandwich, an order of French fries, and a bottle of water. I saw the news report, she said quietly. Yeah. How are you holding up? I am fine, I lied. She placed the bag on the small table by the window, and then she looked right at me. No, you are not, but you will be. In just 2 days, this will all be finished. Natalie will be in handcuffs, Barbara will be in handcuffs, and you will finally get your life back. I do not even know what my life is anymore, I admitted. Susan came over and sat on the bed next to me. You can figure that out later. Right now, we have to finish the job your father started. I studied her face. She was 58 years old, a retired FBI agent who was now a quiet teacher. But right then, in that dingy motel room, she was an agent once more. Her eyes were sharp, her expression was focused, and she was ready for a fight. Tomorrow, she said, I am going to meet with Natalie and Barbara. I will have a recorder on me and I will get them to confess to everything. What if they refuse to talk? I asked. Oh, they will talk, Susan answered with complete certainty. I have a way of making people talk. I did it for 25 years. I could only manage a small nod. Okay? Susan stood up to go. You should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a very big day. She walked toward the door but paused before opening it. Jordan, she said, turning back to me, your father would be so incredibly proud of you. You do know that, right? A lump formed in my throat. I hope so, I whispered. He would be, she repeated, her voice full of conviction. I will see you tomorrow night, she promised before closing the door. As she left, I locked it securely and sank onto the bed. My dinner sat untouched on the table, still warm inside its paper bag. I should have been hungry, but my stomach was twisted into a tight knot. Lying on my back, I stared at the stained ceiling of the quiet motel room. Outside, a neon sign buzzed and cars occasionally rushed by on the highway. Tomorrow, my Aunt Susan would meet my sister Natalie. She would be wearing a hidden microphone to record everything. If Susan could get them to confess, all my current problems would disappear. The arrest warrant, the awful news articles, the public shame, all of it would just become part of the case against them. And Natalie would finally go to prison. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself I just had to survive 2 more days, just 2 more. It was now Tuesday morning at 7:30. I sat on the edge of the bed with my secure laptop open and a disposable phone in my hand. I had locked the door 3 times and drawn the curtains tight. I was waiting for my aunt to meet the two women who were trying to destroy my life. The phone vibrated with a message from Susan. I am all set, it read. She sounded so sure of herself. The wire is on. Can you hear me okay? I opened the audio feed on my laptop, watching a green line move with her voice. Her sound was perfect. Loud and clear, good luck. I am calling her now. I heard a phone ring through my earpiece, followed by Natalie's overly sweet voice. Aunt Susan, what a nice surprise. I heard what happened with Jordan and I am so worried. Can we meet? There was a brief pause. I could feel Natalie thinking through her options. Of course, Natalie finally said. I am glad you called. My mother and I were just about to contact you. I want to help her. Susan then asked, where would be a good place for us to talk? Let's meet at Cafe Nero downtown at 8 o'clock. My mother will be with me. I will see you then. After Susan hung up, she spoke into the wire for me. She took the bait. I am going to get all of this on tape. I watched the clock. It was 7:45. Then it was 8 o'clock. I put in my earpiece to listen. By 8:15, the sounds of a bustling coffee shop came through. I could hear the steam from an espresso machine and the scrape of chairs on the floor. A low hum of conversation was in the background. Then I heard Susan's voice, sharp and clear. Natalie, Barbara, thank you for meeting me. Aunt Susan. Natalie's voice was sickeningly sweet and it made my stomach churn. Thank you for being here. I heard the faint sound of a hug. Then my mother, Barbara, began to speak, her voice thin and nervous. We are just so terribly worried about Jordan. She is not herself. Tell me everything that has been going on, Susan urged. I heard she was at Brookline. She was, Natalie confirmed, but she escaped. The police are searching for her everywhere. We do not know where she is. Escaped? Why would she ever do something like that? Natalie let out a long, dramatic sigh, perfectly faking the role of a worried sister. She is delusional, Aunt Susan. She believes we want to harm her. That is not true at all. We just wanted to get some help. I clenched my jaw so hard that it started to ache. I desperately wanted to scream, but I remained silent and kept listening. What can I do to help you? Susan asked. If she contacts you, Natalie instructed, you need to let us know right away. We must find her before she harms herself. There was a short silence. Then Susan spoke again, her voice gentle and full of concern. I am still a bit confused. Why was she sent to Brookline in the first place? My mother Barbara answered quickly, her voice high and tense. She has been very unstable for a while. She has no job and no money. She just sits in that house all day, writing in her notebooks. We had to get her committed with a Section 12, Natalie added smoothly. It was for her own good. Susan then pressed, so what is this I am hearing about you managing her finances? I held my breath. A long pause followed before Natalie replied cautiously, where did you hear that? Oh, just family chatter, Susan said with a casual tone. You know how everyone gossips. Natalie seemed to relax. It is only a precaution. Jordan's 30th birthday is near, which means a $3.2 million insurance payment. If she cannot manage her own life, someone needs to step in. And I guess that someone is you, Susan remarked. Of course, Natalie replied. I am her sister. What about her inheritance? Susan continued to push. How will you use that money? The atmosphere changed as Natalie chose her words carefully. That money will pay for Jordan's long term care and the best doctors. Then our mother Barbara spoke, her voice trembling. Susan, we are desperate for that money. The family business is failing. Mother, Natalie said sharply, cutting her off. Barbara fell completely silent. On my laptop screen, I watched the sound levels spike. Natalie's one word had shut down our mother's confession. Susan let the quiet linger for a moment before she spoke again. So, this is actually about the business. This is about my family, Natalie corrected her. It is about ensuring Jordan gets the best care. I understand, Susan said. If I hear from her, I will definitely let you know. Thank you, Aunt Susan. We truly appreciate your support. I then heard chairs moving as they all prepared to leave. Susan's quiet voice came through my earpiece. I am leaving now. I got the recording. 10 minutes later, a knock came at my motel room door. I let Susan in. She looked drained but resolute. I have it, she said. She placed a small digital recorder on the table. Natalie admitted the legal action is to get your money. Barbara almost revealed everything. I plugged the recorder into my computer and pressed play. I heard my mother's panicked voice. We need that money, Susan. The business is going down. Then came Natalie's cold, firm command. Mother, we can use this in court, I said. This proves their motive. It is evidence of a conspiracy. Susan nodded. But it is not the whole story. I looked at her, confused. What do you mean? We can prove they want to take your inheritance, Susan said. But we cannot prove they murdered your father. That is what truly matters, Jordan. A confession to that would send them to prison for life. I sat down heavily on the bed. She was right. The recording was damning. It proved they were committing fraud and conspiracy, but it did not mention murder at all. So, what is our next move? I asked. Susan considered it for a second. A determined look crossed her face. I am going to meet them again, she announced. I will apply more pressure tomorrow. I will bring up Michael and make them confess. A chill ran through me. That is far too dangerous. If they find out you are on my side, they will not suspect anything. They think I am just a worried aunt, Susan continued. They are completely convinced that I am helping them. I looked at her face. She was 58 years old and had been retired for years, but right then I saw the federal agent she once was. Her eyes were sharp and focused. She was ready for anything. Okay, I finally agreed. We will try one more time tomorrow. Susan took the small recorder and put it securely in her purse. You should try to get some rest. We are going to end this tomorrow. After she left, I was alone again in the dingy motel room. I stared at my computer screen. The audio file was paused on my mother's words, we need that money. We had proof of their scheme. We knew their reason, but the whole truth was still just out of our grasp. But not for long. Susan was going back tomorrow. She was going to push them harder. She was going to ask the questions that would finally bring the truth to light. If Susan's plan succeeded, we would have their confession by the next night, the truth about my father. We only needed to endure one more day, that was all. Just one more day until the hearing, one more day until I could step into that courtroom and see Natalie's world crumble. I could certainly get through one more day. At 1 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, my phone started to vibrate. It was a call from Susan. Susan? I answered. Her voice was steady, but I detected the strain beneath it. Natalie just asked me to visit the estate. She says there are family issues I should know about. I sat up straight on the bed. She wants you at the main house? She agreed to a private discussion. It will only be her, Barbara, and me. A shock went through my chest. This was our opportunity. She was about to confess. That is precisely what I'm hoping for, Susan agreed. She thinks I am on her side, trying to protect her. She has complete trust in me. You need to be incredibly careful, I told her. If she suspects anything is off, she will not, Susan said with confidence. I know how to manage this woman perfectly. I could hear the quiet, familiar process of her setting up the hidden microphone. There was a faint click from the recorder, then the sound of fabric. The battery is good for 4 hours, Susan said. The sound quality is perfect. I am leaving to go there now. I will be listening to every single word, I assured her. The call ended. I put the earpiece in and opened the monitoring program on my laptop. At 2:15, I heard Susan's voice. Natalie, Barbara, thank you very much for inviting me. Natalie's voice was polite, but it held a cold, sharp quality. Aunt Susan, please enter. We are very glad you could join us. I heard the sound of their shoes on a marble floor, followed by the closing of a heavy door. The room became quiet, with only the gentle noises of a living room and a couch settling. Please have a seat, Natalie said. Can I offer you some tea or coffee? No, thank you. I'm quite all right, Susan replied. So, what did you want to talk about? A quiet moment passed, then Natalie started to talk, her voice now much quieter. This concerns Jordan. It also concerns the family's future. Aunt Susan, you are Michael's sister. You understood him better than anyone. Did he ever speak to you about us? What kind of thing are you talking about? Susan asked. I could hear a slight shake in Barbara's voice when she spoke. About the circumstances of Natalie joining our family. Susan performed her role without a flaw. I was aware that he adopted her when she was a baby. Natalie's voice became sharp. And from where did you learn that information? Susan replied calmly. Michael told me himself many years back. He explained that it did not matter. You were his daughter, by birth or not. A bitter laugh escaped from Natalie. He might have said that, but his behavior proved otherwise. Just before he passed away, he altered his life insurance. Jordan was named the beneficiary, not me. He gave it to his biological child, Jordan. That cannot be true, Natalie. Do not even try. Natalie's voice was like ice. I know exactly what occurred. He knew that I had discovered the truth. I had known for years, so he chose to punish me. Barbara's voice was unsteady. We never intended for you to learn about it that way. I was only 16 when I found out, Mom. I found the adoption documents in your closet. I stayed silent because I hoped that if I worked harder and was better, he would finally accept me as his true daughter. I lay completely still on the motel bed, taking in every single word. She was just a teenager. Susan selected her following words with great care. But he always treated you so wonderfully. He left me with absolutely nothing at all, Natalie cut in. Jordan inherited $3.2 million, and I received a business that was failing badly. So, I did what was necessary. A tense silence filled the space. Then Susan spoke once more. What do you mean, what was necessary? After a long pause, Natalie's voice returned cold and clear. I resolved the problem. What problem did you resolve? I took care of him. Michael, that car accident was not an accident, Aunt Susan. Barbara let out a sudden, horrified sound. Natalie! She is already aware, Mom. Look at her expression. She does not look surprised at all. I felt like I could not get a breath. My own hands were shaking. I pushed the earpiece deeper into my ear. Susan's voice stayed calm and steady. What exactly did you do? Natalie admitted to everything. I cut his brake line. It was on February 14th, 2018. He was heading to the office. The brakes failed on Route 2. His car went off the road, hit a tree, and he was gone in an instant. Barbara was now sobbing without control. We had no other option. Susan's voice interrupted her. I knew, Barbara confessed through her sobbing. I knew her plan, and I did nothing to prevent it. My mother was my partner, Natalie declared. She left the garage open for me the night before. She also turned off the security cameras. After he was gone, we acted like the grieving wife and daughter. The police never had any suspicions. My own cheeks were wet with tears. My dad, the man who showed me how to ride a bike, who helped with my schoolwork, who always said I could do anything I set my mind to. You killed him, Susan stated, her voice full of disbelief. But what was the reason? How could you murder your own father? Natalie's response was disturbingly simple. He was preparing to remove me from his will entirely. She explained he told her everything would go to me, Jordan, the company, the house, every single dollar he owned. So she took measures to prevent that from occurring. Barbara's voice was full of alarm. But it still happened. He had already updated the will a week before he passed. We did not know, Natalie went on. At that stage, it was too late to undo it. So I have waited patiently for 7 years. I waited for Jordan to become 30. I waited for the $3.2 million. And now it is time for me to get it. I heard a chair scrape hard against the floor. I believe I should leave now, Susan said, her voice sounding tight. What is the rush? Natalie seemed entertained. You are not planning to go to the authorities, are you? Nobody would trust you. We are relatives after all, Aunt Susan. We look out for our own. Is that not correct? Susan gave a brief answer. Correct, family. I heard a door swing open. Then I heard Susan's quiet, pressing whisper. I am out. I have the entire recording. I removed the earpiece from my ear and sat in the quiet of the motel room. She actually did it. Natalie murdered my father. And Barbara was aware. She was an accomplice. For 7 years, I had been searching for what really happened. And now, the answer was finally here. I pressed the play button on the sound file. Natalie's voice came through the speakers perfectly clear. I cut his brake line. February 14th, 2018. He was on his way to the office. The brakes gave out on Route 2. This was undeniable proof. The law in Massachusetts supported us. Only one person in a conversation had to agree to be recorded. Since Susan knew it was completely legal, this was a murder. It was planned in advance. This was the evidence I had dedicated years to finding. At 5 o'clock, Susan knocked on my door. She appeared drained and pale. Did you catch all of it? She asked. I could only move my head up and down, unable to speak. She came over and sat on the bed next to me. I am so deeply sorry, Jordan. I am so sorry this is how you had to find out. I brushed a tear from my cheek. It is okay. I needed to hear it for myself. I needed to be completely sure. Susan gently took the small recorder from her shirt and placed it on the nightstand. This is it, she said quietly. This is all we will ever require. When we appear in court tomorrow, we will play this for the judge. Natalie will spend the rest of her days in prison. I gazed at the tiny black device. It was not any larger than my thumb. But that small gadget held all the justice my father was owed. Tomorrow, I said in a low voice. Susan nodded in agreement. Tomorrow. After she left, I sat by myself, staring at the recorder. I had pursued her for 7 long years. The next day, she would listen to her own confession in a court of law. There would be no way out. I just needed to get through one final night. That was all. One last day, and the right thing would be done. I knew I could endure one more day. At 6 on Tuesday evening, Susan came to my room one more time. When I let her in, Susan was there holding the little recorder. She held it out to me as if it were a valuable jewel. In a soft voice, she simply said, I have it. I accepted the small device from her and sat on the bed. The laptop was already on, prepared for use. I connected the recorder and pressed play. Natalie's voice once again filled the silent motel room. I sliced the brake line. On February 14th, 2018. He was driving to his office. His brakes gave out on Route 2. He crashed into a tree and died instantly. I shut my eyes, feeling warm tears run down my face. This was the confirmation I had spent 7 long years trying to find. I had to be certain. I needed absolute evidence. And now it was in my hands. It was no longer a suspicion, but a terrible, solid fact. Susan came and sat beside me on the bed. I am so sorry you had to hear that a second time. I looked at her, my voice strong. Do not be sorry. This is everything I have been working for. I put the audio file on my secure cloud drive and sent it to the FBI. I also sent a copy to Agent Foster. The subject line was clear: confession, the murder of Michael Keller. After that was sent, I rested my head against the headboard. Tomorrow, Natalie would answer for her crime in court tomorrow. She would be forced to hear this recording with no way to deny it. Susan stood and walked to the table. We need to prepare the last pieces of evidence for the morning. I nodded and stood up to join her. We organized all of the documents. We had piles of printed pages, folders with clear labels, and a few USB drives. All of it was the result of our 7 year-long hunt for the truth. The first evidence was the audio. It was made of two separate recordings. In the first recording, Natalie admitted her motive was the $3.2 million. The second one had her full confession to cutting our dad's brakes and Barbara's admission that she knew about it. We obtained both recordings legally so they could be used in a Massachusetts court. Our second type of evidence was financial records. These documents showed $35 million in bonds for a new building project. Of that amount, $22 million was laundered through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. The money ended up in an offshore account belonging to a man named Connor Flynn. The third piece of evidence was a set of emails. Model. The first message was from Natalie begging Connor Flynn for more time to move the money. In another, she ordered Richard Turner to deny me access to my funds and to ensure the cameras were rolling. Our fourth piece of evidence was a fake psychiatric report. A Dr. Anthony Reed had signed papers to have me committed, but we had never even met. We believe he was paid $25,000 simply for his signature. The fifth piece of evidence was a restraining order based on complete falsehoods. It all proved just how long Natalie had been planning this takedown. Our last piece of evidence was the bank's security footage. The video showed me simply trying to access my own money. Natalie had orchestrated the entire confrontation. By 8 o'clock, 6 thick binders were lined up on the table, ready to go. Susan looked at them and said, 7 years of our lives are in these 6 books. I looked her in the eye and replied, it is more than enough. At 8:30, I placed a call to Agent Foster. I asked him, did you receive the audio file? His voice was somber when he replied, we have it. Jordan, I am so sorry about your father. I told him, I will be all right. What is our plan for the morning? Foster explained the strategy. They had already informed Judge Chambers. The judge knew I was working with the agency. In the morning, he would unseal a federal document. Then he would reveal my real identity in open court. The plan was to play the recordings and then take Natalie, Barbara, and Turner into custody. And what happens to Connor Flynn? I asked. A separate team is assigned to him. Natalie is the priority. She might talk against Flynn for a shorter sentence. I shook my head. No, her pride is too great for that. Foster replied. Then she can live out her life in a cell. Justice has arrived. I hung up the phone. This entire nightmare would be over by tomorrow. At 10 o'clock, Susan got ready to leave. She gave me a hug at the door. She whispered to me, you need to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a very long day. I promised her. I will definitely try. She looked at my face for a second. Jordan, your father would be so proud of everything you have done. I truly hope you know that. I had no words, so I just gave a nod. After she left, I locked the door behind her. I pulled a photograph from my wallet that I have carried for 7 years. It was a faded picture of my dad, Michael Keller, with his usual warm smile. I clutched the photo and spoke softly. Dad, I know you are not here, but I hope you would be proud of me. I listened to you. I never trusted Natalie's lies, and I found the truth. Tomorrow, she will pay for what she did to you. I will prove to everyone that your death was no accident. Your own daughter was responsible. I placed the photo on the nightstand and wiped away my tears. 7 years back, I made a vow to get justice for my dad. I swore I would learn the truth. I have fulfilled that promise. Tomorrow is the final step. I lay on the bed, staring up at the plain ceiling of the quiet motel room. The sound of cars on Route 1 was distant. In the morning, I will walk into that courthouse. I will sit right across from Natalie and watch her perfect life fall apart. She was completely sure that she had gotten away with it all. She believed she had stripped me of everything, but she made one gigantic miscalculation. She truly underestimated my strength. She is about to learn the real price of her actions. I let my eyes close. I just had to make it through one more night. That was all. Just this one last night, and then I could face the judge and destroy Natalie for good. I could do that. At 9:30, the judge looked at the lawyer. Mr. Montgomery, you may call your first witness. Mr. Montgomery got to his feet, straightening his jacket. Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Barbara Keller to the witness stand. My mother stood from the seat she shared with my sister. She walked to the stand with slow steps, holding a small tissue in her hand. She had on a light blue dress. It was the exact one she wore at my dad's funeral 7 years ago. The clerk of court read the oath. Do you swear that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? My mother's response was barely audible. I do. Mr. Montgomery walked toward the stand. Mrs. Keller, please tell the court how you are related to Jordan Keller. She is my daughter, Barbara replied. She is my youngest child. And could you describe her mental state over the last few years? My mother's voice began to tremble. Jordan has been very sick. She does not have a job. She hardly ever goes outside. She just fills journals with wild ideas that I cannot follow. They are fantasies. She is convinced that people are watching her. My mother took a moment to pat her eyes with her tissue. She believes we are all trying to harm her. Mr. Montgomery went on. Have you seen any aggressive actions? Yes, I have, she answered. This past Saturday, she made a big disturbance at the bank. The guards had to remove her, and before that, she made threats to Natalie. She said horrible things. What sort of things did she say? The attorney inquired. She claimed Natalie stole money from her. She claimed Natalie killed her own father. It is all false, but Jordan thinks it is real. I remained at my table, my hands clasped together, listening to my mother tell these lies. She performed her role perfectly. She looked like a concerned mother, a victim trying to help her disturbed daughter. She had no idea that I had a tape of her admitting to everything. Mr. Montgomery gave a slow nod. Thank you, Mrs. Keller. I have no more questions. The judge then looked at me. Miss Keller, do you want to question this witness? I stood up from my chair. Not right now, Your Honor. A soft sound of surprise spread through the room. Natalie gave me a confused look. Barbara left the stand and went back to her seat next to Natalie. Mr. Montgomery leaned over and whispered something to Natalie. A confident smile grew on her face. I sat back down in my chair to wait. At 10 o'clock, Mr. Montgomery stood up again. Your Honor, I would like to call Dr. Anthony Reed to the stand. Dr. Reed walked up to the witness box. He was a tall, slender man of 52 years, with silver hair and glasses with thin frames. His gray suit was tailored perfectly, and his calm expression showed he was at ease in this setting. The court clerk gave him the oath. Dr. Reed held up his right hand. I do. Mr. Montgomery went to the witness stand. Dr. Reed, for the court record, would you please tell us your professional qualifications? I am a psychiatrist with full board certification. I have been in practice for 25 years. I specialize in severe mental illness and evaluating risk. And you carried out a psychiatric assessment of Jordan Keller? Yes, I did. I performed it on March 1st as part of a Section 12 petition. And what did you determine, doctor? Dr. Reed placed his hands neatly on the ledge in front of him. Miss Keller shows signs of delusional thinking, especially delusions of grandeur. She thinks she is an agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is not true. There are no records of her employment. She is also positive that her family is part of a criminal plot against her. These are classic signs of paranoid schizophrenia or a related illness. Mr. Montgomery nodded his head slowly. In your professional judgment, is Miss Keller able to handle her own personal matters? No, she cannot, the doctor stated clearly. She has no understanding of her illness. She rejects all medical care and is a danger to herself. Without help, her illness will only get worse. And what do you suggest? A conservatorship is the best course of action. She requires someone to handle her money and make sure she gets psychiatric help. Thank you, Dr. Reed. I do not have any more questions. Judge Chambers then directed her attention to me. Miss Keller, would you like to ask the doctor any questions? I got to my feet. My voice was calm and firm. Dr. Reed, can you tell me exactly how much money my sister paid you to sign that document? The doctor's arrogant expression disappeared. I have no idea what you mean. Your Honor, I said, facing the judge, I will present proof on that issue very soon. Judge Chambers wrote a note on his pad. The court will take that into account. Dr. Reed, you are excused. Dr. Reed quickly exited the witness stand. He avoided looking at me as he walked past my table. Mr. Montgomery then got up to give his final speech. It was 10:15. Your Honor, the proof is undeniable. Jordan Keller is suffering from a serious mental illness. She has no work, no money, and cannot look after herself. Her own mother has described her unstable actions. A qualified psychiatrist has identified her delusions, yet she will not get help. If this conservatorship is not approved, she will continue to decline, and the $3.2 million insurance payout will be wasted. Her sister Natalie Keller is the ideal person for this role. She is financially secure, incredibly successful, and she cares deeply about Jordan's future. I strongly urge the court to approve this request. Mr. Montgomery went back to his seat. From across the courtroom, Natalie shot me a superior look. I knew that expression very well. It was the one she used when she believed she had already won the battle. Barbara was next to her, dabbing her eyes with her tissue. I could see Susan sitting in the third row. Her face was perfectly blank. 2 rows in back of her, Agent Foster sat in a gray suit, observing everything with his hands folded together. The judge finally looked over at me. Miss Keller, are you ready to begin your case? I rose from my chair. The entire courtroom went still. I am, Your Honor, I answered. But first I need to bring up the matter of a sealed federal document. A low buzz of conversation started to fill the room. The smirk on Natalie's face disappeared. Mr. Montgomery gave the judge a puzzled look. Judge Chambers reached for a red folder that was on his desk. He paused for a moment and then his eyes locked with mine. Very well, he said to the court. We will deal with that issue right now. I glanced at Natalie. The color had drained from her face, leaving it a sickly white. This was the moment. This was the exact second she knew that she was completely and totally finished. Thank you for staying with Jordan during this difficult time. If you have followed this far, I would be very grateful if you would leave a comment. Let me ask you this one question. Imagine being in Jordan's shoes with every piece of evidence pointing at you and your own mother claiming you are crazy. What would you do? Would you surrender or would you fight to bring the truth to light? I am really interested to see your answers in the comments. Just a quick reminder, this is a fictional story created for entertainment. Please stop at any time if you begin to feel uncomfortable. But if you want to see the unbelievable truth revealed, the greatest secret is coming up next. At 10:15, when Mr. Montgomery concluded his final remarks, Judge Chambers announced a brief break. Natalie and Barbara stepped out of the courtroom, whispering urgently in the hall. Mr. Montgomery packed his briefcase and carefully avoided looking at me. I stayed in my seat with my hands folded and I waited. Susan, sitting in the third row, caught my eye and gave me a slight supportive nod. Agent Foster stood by the back wall, his face completely unreadable. At 10:45, the bailiff asked everyone to come back inside. When Natalie and Barbara came back in, Natalie's confident smile had returned. She was completely sure that she had already won the case. She had no clue what was coming next. Judge Chambers raised a red folder. The entire courtroom became completely silent. His finger followed the edge of the wax seal, a red circle with the official emblem of the United States Attorney's Office. The judge stopped the proceedings and spoke slowly and carefully. He announced, I need to address a sealed federal document. It is from the United States Attorney's Office. I was told to open it only if this case went to a complete hearing. We are now at that stage. He took a small letter opener and broke the wax seal with a loud crack. The folder was filled with reports, photos, and official papers. He started to read, his expression showing no emotion. 10 seconds felt like a minute. 30 seconds felt like a lifetime. You could feel the tension in the courtroom air. I heard Natalie's sharp breaths and saw Barbara blotting her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Montgomery moved uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes fixed on the file with increasing fear. Finally, Judge Chambers looked up and stared right at me. He said in a steady voice, Miss Keller, please state your full name and job for the court record. I stood up. My voice was powerful and clear, and it filled the quiet room. My name is Jordan Ann Keller. I am a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation at the Boston Field Office. I work in the Organized Crime and Racketeering Division. My badge number is 7824. I have served for 7 years. A deep silence settled over the courtroom, and then chaos broke out. Reporters started writing furiously, and you could hear gasps from the audience. Natalie jumped to her feet and her chair scraped loudly on the floor. She screamed, What is happening? That is not true. She is a liar. Mr. Montgomery looked like someone had just hit him. His mouth hung open without a sound, his gaze darting between Natalie, me, and the judge. Your Honor, I was not made aware of this. Judge Chambers banged his gavel 3 times. The sound echoed like gunshots. Order! I need everyone to sit down right now. Slowly, the room grew quiet again. Natalie dropped back into her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. Barbara sobbed into her hands, but I refused to look away from Judge Chambers. He put the papers down and shot Natalie a freezing look. His voice was like cold steel as he began. This file proves that Miss Jordan Keller has been an undercover agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation since February 2018. She posed as a freelance data consultant with a small income and a thin work history. Her true mission was to investigate financial crimes at Keller Properties. This mission included racketeering, wire fraud, and its links to organized crime, particularly to Connor Flynn of the Winter Hill Syndicate. The blood drained from Natalie's face, replaced by a dark, furious blush as she ground her teeth. The judge's words were sharp as he went on. The file also describes a conservatorship request from her sister, Natalie Keller. Natalie is the main target of this entire investigation. This petition was just a scheme to block a federal case and to get a $3.2 million life insurance policy. That policy was meant for Miss Jordan Keller on her 30th birthday. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. Let me be very clear, Judge Chambers said. This court was used as a tool in a criminal plot. Mr. Montgomery leapt from his chair, his face bright red. Your Honor, I promise I had no idea about any of this. My client told me her sister was not well and needed my help. The judge cut him off. Mr. Montgomery, your client lied to you and she lied to this court. Please sit down. Mr. Montgomery collapsed back into his seat. He glared at Natalie with pure disgust, but she refused to look at him. The judge then turned to the witness stand. Dr. Reed, please stand up. Dr. Reed got to his feet, his face pale and his hands shaking. Doctor, you swore an oath that you examined Miss Keller. You diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia. You said her stories about being an agent were just delusions. Dr. Reed gave a quick nod. Yes, Your Honor, but it appears Miss Keller truly is an agent. The doctor said no more. The judge's voice became quiet and threatening. Dr. Reed, did Natalie Keller give you money to create a false medical report for her sister? Dr. Reed's answer was almost a whisper. I am sure that I conducted a normal. The judge moved closer to the doctor. How much did she pay you? Dr. Reed swallowed, his voice trembling. $25,000. A wave of gasps went through the courtroom. Reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards while the room buzzed with whispers. The judge motioned to the bailiff. Marshal, please take Dr. Reed into custody for perjury and fraud. The officer acted right away, taking out his handcuffs. Dr. Reed presented his wrists, his face a mix of fury and disgrace. As the officer led him past my sister, Natalie, he gave her a hateful look. You promised me this was completely legal, he hissed. The marshal nudged him forward and said, Keep moving. Natalie just stared forward, her jaw clenched and her breaths short. Judge Chambers then spoke to the courtroom. Agent Foster, would you please rise and show your identification? A man in a plain gray suit stood up at the back of the court. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with a calm and competent air about him. He displayed his badge. I am Special Agent Marcus Foster from the Boston office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am Agent Keller's direct supervisor, he added. Everything the judge has said is correct. Agent Keller has been on a deep cover assignment since February of 2018. This hearing is a part of that active investigation. I saw Natalie glance around the room, her expression changing. Her face was no longer pale from shock, but was now red with a frightening rage. Beside her, our mother, Barbara, was weeping, her whole body shaking. Natalie's lawyer was already putting his papers in his briefcase, knowing his job was over. Judge Chambers then turned his gaze back to me. Agent Keller, do you have anything more to show the court? I do, Your Honor. I took a small USB drive from my bag. I have recordings, bank records, and emails proving my sister is guilty of fraud and organized crime. I let a moment of silence pass before continuing. And she is also guilty of murdering our father, Michael Keller, in 2018. The room erupted. Reporters yelled as people in the crowd pushed forward. Natalie shot up from her seat and lunged right at me with a furious look on her face. Two court officers grabbed her just in time. You rat! Natalie shrieked. You framed me! You framed me! The judge slammed his gavel down hard. Order, Miss Keller, sit down now, or I will have you removed. My sister Natalie slumped back into her chair, breathing heavily with anger. Her hands trembled. Our mother Barbara sobbed beside her. Natalie's lawyer then stood up. Your Honor, I must withdraw from representing this client. The judge did not hesitate. Your request is granted. You are dismissed. The lawyer packed his briefcase and walked out without a single glance at my sister. Judge Chambers looked at me with a serious expression. Agent Keller, show us your proof. I walked to the clerk and gave her a small drive. I want to play two sound files, Your Honor. The first was from March 4th at a cafe. The second was from later that day at my family home. My aunt, a retired agent named Susan Blake, legally recorded both of them. I looked over at Natalie. Her face was pale. She understood it was all over. The judge gave a slight nod. Play the first recording. The clerk pushed the drive in, and Natalie's voice suddenly echoed through the quiet courtroom. Once the audio finished, the court had heard Natalie's entire plot for money. They also heard our mother admit that the family company was nearly bankrupt. The room was absolutely still. Natalie just sat there, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. Barbara cried softly beside her. The judge looked back at me. Agent Keller, you may proceed. I moved to a large screen at the front of the courtroom. I used a remote to display the first image. Your Honor, this is the financial information for the Harbor Towers project. In 2024, the city of Boston gave $35 million for its construction. The plan was for 40% of the units to be affordable housing. Keller Properties, with Natalie Keller in charge, was the main builder. I clicked to the next image, showing rows of numbers. Out of that $35 million, we can only find $13 million. The other $22 million vanished into three shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Their names were Seabreeze Holdings, Ocean View Capital, and Blue Horizon Ventures. These businesses were fake, created only to launder the stolen money. A low buzz of conversation started in the room. Natalie's voice broke the quiet. That is a lie. The judge gave her a sharp, warning glance. Miss Keller, you will get your turn to respond. Agent Keller, please continue. I switched to the next slide, which showed a very simple flow chart. This chart maps out exactly where the money went. We followed every single dollar. Each wire transfer has been documented. All the money ended up in the hands of a man named Connor Flynn. He is a known figure in the Winter Hill crime family. The whispering in the courtroom grew louder. I could see reporters scribbling notes as fast as they could. My Aunt Susan sat in the third row, looking calm and proud. In the back of the room, Agent Foster stood with his arms crossed, observing it all. I turned to the judge again. Your Honor, I will now show the emails between Natalie Keller and Connor Flynn. I clicked the remote. A message appeared on the screen, and I read it out loud for everyone. On January 15th, 2025, Natalie Keller sent an email to a hidden account owned by Connor Flynn. She wrote, and I quote, "The project is delayed. I need more time to move the funds. Can you give me 60 days?" Flynn wrote back the next morning. He said, 60 days, do not ask for more. If the police start asking questions, you are alone. I let his threat hang in the air before I moved on. On February 28th, while we were at our mother's birthday party, Natalie sent a different email. This one went to Richard Turner, a manager at Commonwealth Bank. She wrote, "The account is frozen. Make sure she gets no money. When she comes to the bank, record everything. I need to prove she is not mentally sound." I clicked again, showing Turner's reply. He answered in less than an hour. He wrote, "I will take care of it. The cameras will be on. She is walking straight into a trap." Judge Chambers looked over at Agent Foster. "Agent Foster, have you arrested Mr. Turner?" Foster stood up straight. "Agents are going to the bank right now, Your Honor. We should have him in custody within the hour." The judge nodded. "Very well. Agent Keller, please go on." I took a deep breath. This next part was the most difficult, not because of what it would do to Natalie, but because of the family secret it would expose. Your Honor, I have one last piece of evidence. It explains her reason for doing all of this. I clicked the remote and a legal paper showed up on the screen. It was an official adoption certificate. The entire courtroom gasped. Natalie's eyes grew wide with shock. Natalie Keller was adopted on March 12, 1987, I said clearly. She was 3 months old. Michael and Barbara Keller were her adoptive parents. This was kept secret. But Natalie learned the truth when she was 16. Our mother started crying loudly. "Natalie, I am so very sorry." "Be quiet," Natalie snapped, her voice shaking with anger. I kept my own voice steady and calm. My father discovered that Natalie had known for years. Just a week before he passed away, they had a massive fight. He insisted it did not matter, that she would always be his daughter. But he also said he was making changes to his will. He was worried about her reckless spending and wanted to protect the family's finances. I clicked the remote a final time. The last document was a beneficiary update form. On February 7th, 2018, my father changed his life insurance. He took Natalie Keller's name off as the recipient and put Jordan Keller's name instead. The policy was worth $3.2 million. I paused to let that sink in. 7 days later, on February 14th, 2018, my father died in an event that was called an accident. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I looked straight at Natalie. Her face was a mix of sorrow and pure fury. "Dad did not turn away from you because you were adopted," I said softly. "He turned away because he saw the person you were becoming, and he wanted to save you from yourself." Natalie slammed her hands on the table and leaped up. "He betrayed me," she screamed. "He said I was his daughter, but then he gave everything to you." Judge Chambers held up a hand. "Miss Natalie Keller." But Natalie was consumed by her anger, staring at me with tears rolling down her cheeks. "You have no idea what that felt like," she yelled. "To believe you were part of a family just to find out you were their secret project. Then he leaves everything to you, his real child, while I get absolutely nothing." Our mother begged. "Natalie, it was not like that." "You stay out of this," Natalie growled. "Both of you lied to me for my entire life." "Order!" The judge's voice boomed through the courtroom. "Marshal, please take Miss Natalie Keller into custody." As an officer walked toward her, Natalie fell back into her chair and hid her face in her hands. Her whole body shook as she sobbed. For just a second, I felt a hint of sadness for her. I could see her pain, her jealousy, and her anger at being exposed. But then I thought of my father. I thought of the brake line she cut late one night. I thought of all her lies. I thought of the 7 years she tried to destroy my life. In that moment, any pity I had disappeared. Barbara was crying uncontrollably. Her own lawyer was already packing up his things. He understood the case was lost. Judge Chambers stared at me. Agent Keller, you are accusing her of murder. Do you have proof of that? I held up a very small flash drive. Yes, Your Honor. This drive has her complete confession. Natalie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with total terror. On March 4th, 2025, my Aunt Susan Blake went to see Natalie and Barbara. During that meeting, Natalie confessed to cutting the brake line on our dad's car. Barbara confessed that she knew about it and helped to hide it. An FBI device recorded their entire conversation. Massachusetts law only requires one person to consent to a recording, so this evidence is perfectly legal. Judge Chambers leaned forward, now fully engaged. I want to hear that recording. I gave the flash drive to the clerk, who put it into the computer. A tense silence filled the courtroom. I spoke to the judge, my voice clear and strong. Your Honor, I wish to call Susan Blake to the witness stand. Susan stood up from her seat in the third row. She was 58 years old, wearing a professional gray blazer with her silver hair tied back neatly. My Aunt Susan approached the witness stand with confidence. A court official was waiting to administer the oath. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? My aunt's voice was firm. I do. I then started to question her. Miss Blake, could you tell the court how you are related to me? I am your aunt, she answered. I am your father's sister. And can you please tell us about your professional history? I was a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 25 years, she said. I retired in 2015 from the division that handles financial crimes. Did you have a meeting with Natalie and Barbara Keller on the 4th of March? Yes, I had two meetings with them. The first was at Cafe Nero that same morning, and the second was at the Keller estate later that day. Did you use a recording device during these meetings? Yes, I did. It was a bureau issued encrypted digital recorder. Massachusetts law allows for one party consent. That means these recordings can be used as evidence in court. And what was the reason for these meetings? Susan's voice was firm and confident. To get a confession about how my brother died back in 2018. A low murmur spread across the courtroom. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I want to play the audio from the second meeting. It was recorded at the Keller estate on March 4th at 2:15 in the afternoon. Judge Chambers gave a small nod. You may continue. I put the flash drive into the court's computer. Suddenly, clear voices broke the silence of the room. First came Susan's steady tone. What did you do? Then Natalie's voice, cold and sharp. I took care of it. I took care of him. Michael, that was no accident, Aunt Susan. Then our mother Barbara's voice was heard, filled with panic. Natalie, she is already aware of it. Mother, look at her. She is not surprised in the least. Natalie's voice cut in. I severed his brake line on February 14th, 2018. He was driving to his office. His brakes gave out on Route 2. The car flew off the road, hit a tree, and he died on impact. I stood without moving with my arms hanging at my sides. I was hearing my own sister admit to murdering our father. My mother Barbara's voice came from the speakers, thick with sobs. We had no other option, Susan. We had to. Barbara, I was aware, I knew what she planned to do, and I did nothing to stop her. Natalie's voice interrupted again. My mother was my partner in crime. She was the one who let me into the garage that night. She shut off the security cameras, and after he was gone, we acted like the heartbroken family. The police never had a clue. Susan's recorded voice then asked, But why? Why would you kill your own father? Natalie laughed, a short, bitter sound. Because he planned to cut me out of his will. 2 weeks before he died, he told me he was changing it all. He was going to give everything to Jordan. The business, the home, the life insurance. I would have been left with absolutely nothing, so I made sure that would not happen. My mother Barbara's voice was full of despair. But it did no good. He had already signed the new papers a week before he died. We had no idea until after the funeral, Natalie. We were too late. So I waited for 7 years. I waited for Jordan's 30th birthday. I waited for the $3.2 million to be paid out. And now I am going to claim it. The recording stopped. A deep silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Chambers leaned back in his chair. He looked at Natalie for a long time, then his gaze shifted to me. Marshal, he said in a low voice, arrest Barbara Keller and Natalie Keller. The charges are first-degree murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The court marshal moved toward them. Two federal agents also stood up from the back. Natalie jumped out of her chair. No, no, this can't be happening. An agent grabbed her arm firmly. Natalie Keller, you are under arrest for the murder of Michael Keller. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be held against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Her arms were forced tightly behind her. The click of the handcuffs was loud in the quiet courtroom. She glared at me, her eyes filled with pure hate. You are responsible for this, she spat, her voice thick with fury. You are the one who destroyed our family. I held her gaze, my voice steady and calm. No, you did that all by yourself 7 years ago. Barbara began to cry as the second agent cuffed her. She did not fight. She simply stood there while tears streamed down her face. I am so sorry, she whispered, her eyes on me. Jordan, I am so very sorry. I did not want. You had 7 years to speak the truth, Mom, I answered, my voice empty of all emotion. You decided not to. The agents walked them both out of the courtroom. Natalie fought against them the whole way. Barbara went quietly, her head held low. The room exploded with noise as reporters shouted and cameras flashed over and over. Judge Chambers slammed his gavel down. Order! The doors swung shut behind my family. The judge addressed the court. This court throws out the conservatorship petition with prejudice. Jordan Keller is now declared mentally sound and completely able to handle all of her personal and financial affairs. I am also sending this case to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office to file criminal charges. This hearing is officially over. He struck the gavel one last time. It was really done. I stood there, my hands hanging by my sides, just feeling my own heartbeat. Agent Foster came over and held out his hand. That was excellent work, Keller. I took his hand. Thank you, sir. Susan stood beside me. She put a kind hand on my shoulder. You did it, she said softly. I could only nod. I could not find any words to say. It had been 7 very long years, 7 years of living a lie, 7 years of playing a character, 7 years of watching my sister tear down everything our father had built. And now it was all over. But I did not feel like I had won. I did not feel any relief. I just felt a very deep and total exhaustion. I looked over at the empty seats where Natalie and Barbara used to be. Their table was cluttered with papers and a half-full glass of water. It was all that remained of the life they had just destroyed. My family was completely broken. My mother and sister would probably be in prison for the rest of their lives. The company was going to be dismantled. The house was going to be sold. Everything my father had worked for was gone. But he was finally receiving justice. After 7 long years, justice was finally being served. Walking out of the courtroom, I knew the most difficult part of my journey was just beginning. The pain of your own family betraying you does not just vanish when you hear the sound of handcuffs closing. It lingers in the quiet that follows, in the empty seats at the table, and in all the questions you can never ask. The worst part is knowing the people who were supposed to love you the most chose money over you. I had won the legal battle in the courtroom, but it certainly did not feel like a victory. My father got his justice and the truth came out. In exchange, I won my freedom, but I lost my whole family. I bent down to grab my briefcase. Susan walked beside me toward the exit. A huge crowd of reporters was waiting, but they were just a blur. After 7 years of fighting, it was all over. At 1 o'clock, I walked out of the courthouse. The reporters immediately swarmed around me. The flashing cameras were blinding. Agent Foster and Susan flanked me, clearing a path to the parking garage. Foster's car was a dark, unmarked sedan. I got into the back seat and Susan sat down next to me. You were amazing in there, Jordan, Foster said as he turned on the engine. Your father would be incredibly proud of you. I just gazed out the window. My own mother and sister were now going to prison for life because of me. Susan's hand gently covered mine. You did what was necessary. My voice was a whisper when I answered, I know, but this doesn't feel like a victory. We drove in silence through the streets of Boston. I saw the world go on as if nothing had happened. On the outside, everything was the same, but my entire life had been torn apart. Where should we go? Susan asked. I had nowhere left. My townhouse felt tainted by all the lies. Our family home was now just a crime scene. I honestly do not know, I admitted. You can stay with me, she offered, for as long as you need to. I could only nod. Words failed me. My aunt was the only family I had left. 2 weeks passed, and I sat in Susan's house watching the news report our entire story. Betrayal from family never announces itself. It smiles at you across the dinner table during the holidays. It hides in phone calls filled with pretend concern. Sometimes it even pretends that it is all for your own benefit. I had to learn this in the hardest way possible. For 7 entire years, I lived a secret life. I did it to expose the one person who smiled to my face while plotting my downfall, my sister. This is the story of how I clawed my way back from utter despair to reclaim my life and get justice for my father. If this story connects with you, I hope you will keep listening. And if it resonates, please share it with others who might need to hear it. I miss my father more than words can say. After 7 years working undercover, I knew I was finished. I have since left that job and now I must figure out who I am again. My Aunt Susan was my unwavering support through everything. We stood side by side watching a small girl play in the courtyard of my dad's completed building. This was his true legacy, not some corporation, but safe homes where families could thrive. Susan then asked what I would do with the money I inherited. I explained that I would keep the remaining $2.2 million. I plan to visit the places my dad always dreamed of, like Italy, Greece, and Japan. When I get back, I will find a new city and begin my life again. When the last day of the trial came, I could not bring myself to enter the courthouse. I followed the news from my home, just wishing for the whole nightmare to end. The news anchor's voice was steady. He announced that Richard Turner and Connor Flynn were now in custody. Then, a picture of my sister filled the screen. Natalie Keller was sentenced to life in prison without any chance of parole for first-degree murder. Barbara Keller received 25 years for conspiracy. Neither of them showed any sign of emotion. I simply switched off the television. The greatest surprise, however, was still to come. Susan later told me that our father had suspected Natalie from the very beginning. That was why he secretly made me the sole beneficiary. He was protecting me even then. 6 months later, the insurance payment of $3,200,000 appeared in my account on my 30th birthday. The money was never the real goal. The true win was seeing Harbor Towers finished. I took $1 million of the money to finish the housing community my sister tried to destroy. The city officially approved renaming it in my father's honor. His legacy is now a secure place for 120 families to live. I discovered that seeking justice can bring you closure, but pursuing revenge only poisons your own spirit. Do not let vengeance become your only purpose. Let the truth be your weapon, and let your integrity be your defense. The scars left behind by betrayal are just reminders of your own strength and survival. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I sincerely hope you never have to travel down a similar path. But if that happens, I hope you can meet it with immense courage.